So thank you, David. Okay, so Al talked about those infidels that want to know about dragonflies and moths. Well, you're one of them. You came to the presentation I know what to expect. But really, I call butterflies are moths that have just taken a different route. But why Sphinx moths? Sphinx moths are one of our more massive moths. They've got such a unique shape, unique flight, that it's no wonder that we're so fascinated by them. And even so, they're even more mysterious because they try to hide who they are. The day-flying ones try to emulate other animals, whether it be hummingbirds or bumblebees or wasps, and then those that don't, that do look like Sphinx moths, fly at night. So there is an element of mystery about them. Well, first we'll discuss kind of a basic biology of the entire critter, not just the adults, but the larva and the pupa. So the adults are usually called hawk moths. Some of them are known as hummingbird moths. That usually refers to a specific species. But they're normally called hawk moths. Basically, they have these extremely elongate forewings compared to their hind wings. Very long forewings. This allows for very strong flight. They can hover at these long tube flowers, much like a hummingbird, just like a hummingbird. And that's what that huge thorax is for. That houses those flight muscles. And they fly much the same way as a hummingbird do by using a figure 8 with their wings. You can kind of see this one on the backswing of its stroke, and that's how they hover. The proboscis is usually well developed, but in some species it's lacking completely. And I'll discuss which ones that's going to be. This presentation is primarily going to be identification, so you guys have an idea of what Sphinx moths you see that may, say, come to a light trap at a WBA conference, because these are common visitors to a light trap, or ones that you might see out in your yard during the day, ones you might see on WBA trips, some of our day-flying ones, or maybe the occasional one that lands on your porch light. The larvae are usually called hornworms for that characteristic horn at the end of each larva. And they develop into a very nice looking horn on the last instar. The first instar, the horn is usually incredibly long, but it's not what you would think of as a horn. It's not very sickle shaped yet. It's more so just a long, looks like a long setae. One thing I had the privilege of working in the Ridderford lab at the UW for 2 weeks, raising tobacco hornworms for juvenile hormone research. And we found, they found, that the larvae will actually, when they run out of food, will actually turn around and eat their own tail. It's just a little bit of extra food. So it's completely vestigial. It doesn't serve any purpose other than maybe it's a target for birds, breaks off. So they were able to eat it before pupating. The dots on the sides of each species are usually pretty colorful, pretty elaborate, but those are basically the spiracles where they breathe, where direct gas exchanges, and that's on every larva, butterfly or moth. Just with these hornworms, they're usually pretty elaborate. They can be pests, if you guys know about the tobacco hornworms or the tomato hornworms. These are usually a pretty big pest in one's garden, but that's a few species, usually in different parts of the country. We don't have that big of a problem with them here. Larvae are regularly parasitized, whether it's tachinid flies or brachionid wasps. That's what these are. Each one of these is the cocoon of a brachionid wasp. And so these parasitoid meaning that they will end up killing their host, but not right away like a predator would. And a parasite doesn't kill its host, it just kind of feeds off of it. A parasitoid will eventually kill its host, so not the best way to go. Pupae, most of our species pupate underground, so once they're done feeding on the plant, they will travel down the trunk of the tree or shrub that they're feeding on, and they'll look for a nice soft place to dig into sand or dirt, usually a couple inches down, and make their pupa. They are naked. There's nothing surrounding them. We've often heard that moths will surround themselves by leaf material before making their pupa. No, these guys just crawl into the dirt and pupate right in there, right in the hollow chamber. Many will sport a tongue case, and this is what houses their proboscis. And some of them don't have that.
Any correlation between the tongue case and ones that feed as adults?
What I have found is that if it does have a tongue case, based on reports, it does nectar. This, so-so. Some of them that don't have a tongue case will still nectar, and some of them that don't have a tongue case won't. But if you see this, that's a pretty sure bet that this is a species that will use flowers as adult food.
I've come across these digging in the dirt in my garden.
Yeah.
I never knew what they were.
Now, there are other species that also dig in the dirt. In particular, there's a very common one called the European underwing, Noctua primum. It's a noctuid moth that does this, and that's much more common than these are going to be. It's, as you can guess by the name, it is from Europe, and it's gotten incredibly abundant over the last few years. I come across those more often than anything when digging in the garden, but you may find one of these eventually, but they'll be huge. They'll be like this big, versus the noctuids are about maybe an inch. Don, you had a question?
No, that was the size of.
Oh yeah, no, these guys are usually a pretty good 2-3 inches or so. Donna?
So the ones that you said that are more common, are they the same kind of orange color here?
Yeah, they're usually kind of a red. The noctuid are still going to be a reddish color.
Okay.
Yeah. Kim?
How do they create the tongue case?
I look at ecology, I don't look at development. I could ask people in the Hereford lab, but I'll get back to you on that. Because that is, it almost looks like it has a little handle where you can string them on a line and then just carry them back to your truck that way. So we do have some really famous examples in biology and media with these kinds of moths. Probably the most famous example is, I'm not going to go with Latin names here, but basically this is an orchid which has these incredibly long Stuart corollas.
Well, there's a tube
Yes.
in it. And
Yeah.
what that tube is called, I'm not remembering.
Okay. At the very bottom of these tubes, though, you have the flower that it goes back, and then there's these long tubes, and there's nectar right at the very bottom. And when trying to explain Darwin's theory of evolution, of natural selection, this was what a lot of critics pointed to. They would point to this orchid and say, well, what could possibly feed there? And Darwin said, I bet there's going to be a moth. That there's going to be a Sphinx moth. He knew about Sphinx moths. That's going to have a proboscis or some other insect that has a proboscis that is 12 inches long. 50 years later, found it. He didn't. They found it after Darwin had passed. So this is now usually called Darwin's moth, or the Latin name, Predicta.
This is found in Madagascar only. And,
Yes,
it's
Madagascar.
very cool. We actually saw this orchid while we were there.
Oh, excellent. Did you see the moth?
No.
But yeah, so this is a 12-inch proboscis. So that's probably the most famous example biologically, Kim.
So what's the size of the moth?
3 to 4 inches or so. Oh, it's
I mean, that's big.
pretty average size for these guys. They're pretty robust moths. But yes, very long proboscis. And then probably the most famous example from the media is the death's head hawk moth, which that name applies to 3 different species, but all 3 of these moths have what looks to be a skull on their thorax. So from Silence of the Lambs is where we really know this moth.
Where's that moth found?
These are all found in Europe and Asia. Those 3 species. I think they range down into Africa too. Okay, so we'll start off immediately into it. So we have 4 different subfamilies. I won't go too far into taxonomy with these. So even though Sphinx moths represent a very identifiable family right off the get-go, there is still some diversity within the Sphinx moths themselves. So we have 4 different subfamilies, and you'll see the similarities and the differences as I go through. So this is Sphinginae, the I don't know what you would call it, the typical subfamily. So we're going to go this one first, Manduca, quinquemaculata. It's also known as the five-spotted hawk moth. You usually find this, if you do find it in Washington, eastern Washington. The host plants are anything in the Solanaceae family, so things like your garden potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, anything in that family. So this would be your garden pest of a hawk moth in Washington.
What do you call that, the tomato hornworm?
This is what a name for the larva would be the tomato hornworm. Yeah. Although the other mandukas will also use tomato, and this will also use tobacco, and so it doesn't really matter at that point. But so if you are going to find it in Washington, it's usually going to be in gardens and farms. It's much more common in the southern states. You're not going to come across this moth too often in Washington, but it is here. The literature says it flies around dusk, usually May through September, and then this is a nectaring species.
What are its 5 spots? Which 5 spots is it named?
Yeah.
I will show you. So basically, this is how this presentation is going to work. Is I'm going to show you a pin specimen so we can look at all the markings. Then I'm going to show you a picture of it in the wild. You can see it here, nectaring. And then I'll show you a picture of the larva and pupa if I have it. So manduka is Latin to chew. And boy, do they do this on your tomatoes. So the other species that could easily get confused with this is Manduca sexta, the 6-spotted hawk moth. So the spots you're looking for are these orange spots down the side. This 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's a little one right there, 6. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're looking at the yellow spots, 6 for the 6-spotted hawk moth, 5 for the 5-spotted hawk moth. Manduca sexta is also known as the tobacco hornworm. Will be more of a brownish color. The 5-spotted hawk moth will be more of a grayish color. You see these jagged lines on the hind wings? These aren't quite jagged. There's kind of more black lines in the 6-spotted hawk moth. But this is, like I said, not a common one. Probably won't run into it too often. You will if you go down to, say, the southeast. Okay, so now we're going to get into ones that we do see more often. This one is a common one when WABA sets up light traps at conferences. This is called the snowberry sphinx, or it's also called the Vashti sphinx. Just switch the Latin name. It is eastern Washington, but it is named after one of its host plants, snowberry. Typically a May through July flyer in mountainous woodlands and riparian edges is where we usually come across it. When John Davis set up his trap at Leavenworth, we got a couple of these guys. The adults are nocturnal and they are reported to nectar. So, very pretty larva. You'll see just the ornateness of these larvae just continue to grow stronger. And look at this little tiny tongue case. I mean, it can be pretty elaborate, it can be short, it can be non-existent, so it's a gradient in all of them. But what you're looking at for the Vashti sphinx, compared to the others, and it'll get more obvious as we look at the more closely related ones, keep in mind this black dash right here. Keep that in mind. Because then we move on to the elegant sphinx. This is also eastern Washington. This is a specialty of the West Coast, though. California, Oregon, Washington. And I think southern BC, but that's it. Similar flight time to the Vashti sphinx, a little bit later, June to August, and the adults also do nectar. You're going to find it in many of the same areas. I find the snowberry sphinx and the elegant sphinx at the same nights at light traps. But very different host plants. This is our only sphinx that's going to use ceanothus. So if you see so I've come across hornworms on ceanothus shrubs as I'm hiking through eastern Washington. Only one thing that can be the elegant sphinx. Manzanita and madrones are reported to be used in California more often than ceanothus. And the adults are nocturnal. So notice that black line is missing on this one. Very faint on this one. It's not a solid black line. Nice purple and white stripes. Very beautiful dark blue horn. And then very short tongue case. Not that I expect you to find pupa all that often, you more find them by accident.
All the more reason to show us a picture.
Exactly. So here's a picture comparing the elegant sphinx and the snowberry sphinx. You see that well-defined line on the snowberry sphinx and how it's not even really there on the elegant sphinx. Instead, it has more of this pale white line or band. The Vashti Sphinx is also much smaller. This is your typical size Vashti Sphinx, this one right here. And this is not the elegant Sphinx, but this is a typical size for an elegant Sphinx. So there is some size difference as well. But you get a small male elegant Sphinx versus a large female snowberry Sphinx, and it can get confusing there. So mainly you're looking for this black line. Okay, wild cherry sphinx. Another eastern Washington. Usually flies July. I mean, there's not a whole lot of records for these, so these are just approximate whatever's in the text, whatever's on websites that track these. And so most of our records come from people walking out their front door and there's a sphinx moth hanging out on the porch. These adults are nocturnal. They also are said to nectar. But this one's interesting that there's really no clear habitat associations here as far as elevation, as far as vegetation type. All we can really say is that it's mainly in wooded areas. Host plants are mainly, true to the name, prunus and mallow species. So you have wild cherries, apples, that's mainly what they're going for. And
You
what
said
you're
wild cherries and apples. Do they use any domestic cherries or apples?
I believe they do. I believe. I'll have to double check, but I believe they do. But since it's eastern Washington, and since most of our domestic ones are sprayed quite a bit, I imagine their range is greatly diminished because of that. But this is a pretty rare one to come across. We did come across one during our 2007 Leavenworth conference, and this is it on one of the participants' hands. Very nice larva. You notice that it has not as broad purple and white, no blue on the horn there, and you're going to find it on completely different host plants. But one thing to notice that's different about these from our previous ones, so you see the costa of these. This one has some white. This one has very little white. Notice how white that shoulder gets. I mean, especially in this individual there. Really white shoulder, and you have this wavy black-edged white line that the others don't have. Those two characteristics are going to help you separate this species from the other two. So our black, white, gray moths can be confused with each other, but there are a few things to help tell them apart. Mainly if you look at this area, that should help you with what moth you're dealing with. Okay, last of our gray, white, black ones is the great ash sphinx. And this one's unique in where you're going to find it. You're going to find this one in southwestern Washington. This is not an eastern one. And it's interesting because you'll find it all over the east. From New England down to Florida, across the southern part of the U.S., and then it goes up into southwestern Washington. This is mirrored with quite a few of our butterflies. I believe the dun skipper mirrors that range. But with a name like great ash, you can once again guess what the host plants are. So host plants are going to be ash, but also cherry, privet, lilac's been used, a variety of others. But mostly you're going to find this in woodlands, scrublands. The adults are nocturnal, they do nectar, fly in high summer. But notice this one's just a very even gray. There's not this mixing of white areas and black areas and gray areas like with these others. It's just this uniformly ash gray. So not only does ash really help you with associating with the host plant, but it also gives you an idea of what kind of gray you're looking at. So you're going to find this mostly on ash. but it will use your yard lilacs, but mostly southwestern Washington. The only person I know of in Washington that's seen it is John Davis, and that he lives down in the Columbia Gorge, where that's where you're going to find this guy. So just this evenly gray forewing is going to help you distinguish the great ash lynx as well as area. Not eastern Washington, southwestern Washington. Okay, so we get into the Smarindinae. All of these are non-feeding. As adults, they do not nectar. They have no functional mouth parts. Their only job is to find each other, mate, and lay their eggs. So essentially, they're starving them. They live until they starve to death, or until a jay finds them. So we're going to start off with our most common one. This is the one-eyed sphinx. Now, it's not to say it has only one eye. It does have two compound eyes. And there is, maybe because there's one eye on each wing. Two eyes there. These are not functional eyes, you know, but I sometimes have to explain that to people. So this is utilizing the classic scare tactic. Normally when sphinx moths sit while they're resting, they will look much like this. Wings covering those bright eye spots. Something disturbs it at jay and then it will flash those eye spots. Eye spots are scary in nature. Much longer flight period, May through August, which is odd for a critter that doesn't feed. It has a very prolonged flight period, even though we have evidence that there's only one generation here. Now, this is also taking into account things from sea level to higher elevation, so that's probably why it has such a long flight period. I said these are night flying, do not feed. Usually find these in riparian areas due to their host plants. Their host plants are willows and poplars. But this is the one that most often you're going to see if you walk out of your house and there's a sphinx moth sitting on your porch light. This is likely going to be it.
Outside of Washington, does it have a very broad distribution?
It does, very broad. If you want to look at that in more detail, I'll show you that in there, but I believe it's nearly nationwide. And pretty far, no, the other one is pretty far north. So this one extends a little bit into southern Canada, but it's nearly nationwide. I think you don't find it in the most driest of areas in our country, but you know, people that I know from the East Coast see this guy too. And in our state, it comes in two different phases, the dark phase and the light phase, which is a very light brown. So these two right here, same species, different colors. But one thing that's going to be consistent on both of them is I like to think of this mark at the shoulder as a bird. You're seeing the head, beak, going down to the neck. Looks more like a finch here. But that helps. Not many of the others have that. It does take a little bit of
I'm
imagination.
not seeing the bird yet. Can you help me?
Not yet? Maybe it'll become more apparent when we look at the
It's
others.
just the head of the bird.
Just the head.
I see a
You're
possible beak.
just looking, yep, the beak.
Just the beak.
Just the beak.
Not the
Imagine
top
there's a
of
little high eye there. You're just looking at the face.
Top of the head's chopped off.
A little bit, yeah. So it's a little bit of imagination, but I find that works for identifying the species. Otherwise,
Hair.
you have this nice pink, single pupiled eye. This is the larva, much more slender than, say, what we saw with the previous species, where there's these really bulbous larvae. This probably helps it to camouflage with the slender willow leaves, I'm guessing. So here's a mating pair. Much like with our butterflies, the males are smaller than the females. Females usually have a very large bulbous abdomen because they're full of eggs. And the male very skinny because he only has one job to fertilize those eggs. So once again, this species, only job is to mate. Doesn't nectar, anything like that. You won't find it in flowers. So let me move on to our next most common species, you would say, in Washington, or at least in the Seattle area. That's the blinded sphinx. Once again, that's not to say this moth can't see. It can see, but the idea, I think the way that it got the blinded name is that the eye spots have no pupils. You go back to the other one. There's a black spot in that white dot. This one, there is none.
Hmm.
But there are ways to tell them based on just on the forewings. So if you do come across a moth, or someone sends you a photograph where the wings are closed, you can still tell who it is.
I always nudge them open to see. You can usually push it without it flying away.
Well, and you have reason to anyway. To miss that,
Of course.
that is just stunning. It's about as pink as you'll ever see on a critter. So once again, these are nocturnal, do not feed. They're found in many of the same places as the one-eyed sphinx. And they are a generalist feeder. They'll feed on cherry, lilac, willows, cottonwoods, maples, a lot of different things. So therefore they occupy a wide range not only in Washington, but in the United States. Al found one on the Interurban Trail.
Burke Gilman Trail.
Burke Gilman Trail. You saved a larva from being eaten by a crow.
Yeah, and it was really tough. That crow was pecking at it, did no damage whatsoever.
Tough little guys.
It rolled to me as a ball. I thought it was a wad of chewing gum at first.
But he sent me the picture of the adult. Turned out to be this guy. So the blinded sphinx and the one-eyed sphinx are going to be your two most likely candidates, or at least two most likely you're going to see in Seattle. I unfortunately do not have a specimen of this guy to show you. I saw my first one dead at the conferences here. I've yet to really come across this, but I get records sent to me every year. And with this year, with many of our butterflies having a poor year, these two actually did pretty well. I got a lot of records of these two. So one thing you're going to look at is that it doesn't have that clear, we'll call it a bird's beak for now instead of a bird's head, that profile. Very green larva, not really much to speak of as far as decoration. But one thing to look for on this species, you see this dot? This is what we call the discal spot. And it is lacking in the one-eyed sphinx. Notice how scalloped these wing edges are. Not so scalloped in the one-eyed sphinx.
Scalloped and white bordered.
And white bordered. So mostly, if you look at that, you look for that spot. If that spot's not there, it's not this one. But they're about the same size. They're common, so they can get confused. But even though you don't need the hind wings to tell who it is, if you find one, I'd still encourage you to try to look at it. Okay, so then we move on to the small-eyed sphinx. Small-eyed probably because of the small spots, or maybe because it's the smaller of our eyed sphinx. But pretty distinctive from our other two-eyed sphinx in that this one's red. This one's a very nice burgundy red color. You're going to find it in eastern Washington, not western Washington, only eastern Washington, whereas the other two are also found in eastern Washington. May through September flight, a little bit later, a little bit extended. Once again, do not feed in are mostly found in riparian situations. I've had a night where all three, I just told you I hadn't seen the blinded sphinx before, but this will come to the lights, the same lights that the one-eyed sphinxes will come to. Host plants are Rosaceae family, so usually prunus trees, so your cherry trees, things of that nature. All these specks you see on the thorax there, that speaks to the difficulties of keeping a collection. That's dermested beetle species. So I nearly lost the specimen to dermested beetles. If any of you don't know what those are, they're beetles that basically come in, they're larvae and eat dead protein, which is what these are.
And what do you do about it?
Well, I have these thin little cardboard boxes, which you can put fumigant strips in there to deter beetles from entering. But since these are really flimsy, that smell's just going to permeate the room, so that's not an option. So I do weekly checks through my boxes, and what I do is I look to see if there's a pile of that dust beneath a specimen, and if there is, that's a sure sign that there's something in there eating it. So I just toss the whole box into the freezer for a couple days. That'll kill it. So maintaining a collection is a lot of work. So this is the live adult, not the spread specimen. Someone described it as an oil slick. You see an oil slick on the bush that has like these waves of different color on it. It's really just a gorgeous creature. And if you see it out in the wild, these red spots all over it, no other Sphinx moth caterpillar has those. It's also been called the sweetheart Sphinx because of all these red spots.
You don't know what myops would mean, would you?
I don't. I could probably find it in here,
Myopic means nearsighted.
which I think they are. Okay, so let me move on to the modest Sphinx. Eastern Washington again, May through July, nocturnal, don't feed, sensing a pattern within the Smarindinae subfamily. And you're going to find these in riparian areas rich in willows and poplars. This is large, very large. I mean, you look at this is a robust critter. 5 inches typical wingspan.
He's not modest.
Well, kind of makes you wonder why he got that name. So, I'm going to show you the other species, the other lookalike species to this, before I just start discussing the points, because otherwise it's not going to mean much to you. Picture of the larva. Oh, and these guys get huge. They get like 6 inches. Big larva. Sphinx moths are great for kids to raise. And there's the adults. So perhaps it's modest because it's only our second biggest sphinx. Our first biggest is the western poplar sphinx, or it's also known as just the western sphinx, Occident meaning western. So this is our other, we have other willows feeding, but look-alike to our modest sphinx. So maybe it's modest because it's okay with being number 2. But this is primarily going to be in southeastern Washington. Once again, nocturnal, don't feed, just about the same flight time as Modesta here. Riparian habitats and host plants are willows and poplars, so much the same, ecologically anyway, just different area. Whereas the modest sphinx ranges all over the United States. This is pretty much just west of the Rocky Mountains. Rocky Mountains west to the Cascade Mountains. So the two things to look for. You're going to see that this black spot here is in a well-defined triangle. Really obvious on this. There's a well-defined black triangle there. And in here it's just kind of a black line. Boy, you could kind of draw a triangle there. It's ironic that our largest ones are often the hardest to tell apart. Just like our fritillaries. But these are the two sphinx that I have the hardest time telling apart when people send in photographs, particularly when they're close-winged. So then here's the larva, much the same as Modesta, and the adult at someone's screen door. The females here regularly get 6 inches. I mean, just to imagine the force behind these, I was at a light trap with about a dozen of these guys, a dozen of these Modestas, and one of them hit me in the back of the head. I thought it was a clumsy bat. I look down and there's a moth flopping on the ground. And when you hold these guys behind, much as you would hold butterflies behind the wings, behind the shoulders, you can really feel these muscles throbbing to get out. And they can often work themselves out too. So, we'll go back again. Very extensive red on the western poplar sphinx. No real well-defined triangle. I think that works half the time. Half the time's better than, which I guess is pretty random too. We only have 2 to work with. Supposedly less extensive red, but I guess more of a maroon red, whereas this has been called a red, a brick red. There's variation in these guys too. These guys have a light phase shown here and a dark phase. So these guys can be tough. I mean, if you're in northeastern Washington, you can be pretty sure that it's going to be the modest sphinx. But if you're in southeastern Washington, all bets are off. There is one thing that I have noted that kind of helps, which the triangle kind of helps. and the color of the red kind of helps. But maybe using a combination of them will help. You notice that both of them have this little projection in that band. But you'll notice this one, that on the western poplar sphinx, that little projection is a little higher up on the wing, whereas this one's a little bit lower. There's a different shape to it. And I found using that in combination with the black triangle or absence of, and the color of the red sometimes helps. But if you still have trouble with these guys, so do I. These are the two that I struggle with identifying the most. But I do like the genus name of these two, Packy Sphinx, the big boys. And, well, it really should be the big girls. The girls are the big ones. So, haven't seen this one yet. Intend to. Have seen the Moths Sphinx in good numbers. There are real treasures to find out there. Okay, so now I'm moving to some really, really cool Sphinx moths. Ones that I'm going to let Kim tell you the story of. All right. De la Fontaine. Also known as our clear wings. So these are not to be confused with the other clearwing moths that mimic bees and wasps, the Societidae, which are small, that really do look like tiny hornets. But instead of seeing mandibles, you're going to see a proboscis. These guys are pretty big bodied. They're said to imitate bumblebees instead. But this is our hummingbird clearwing moth, which does imitate a hummingbird.
Is that what we saw?
Not this one, or other one. So this is Hemaris thisbe, primarily thought to be a eastern species, and then extending west up into Alaska, but diagonally. Never really reached Washington. John Davis, though, found it in his yard. He has a great photograph of it, so we have photo documentation that's here. Whether it is here permanently, maybe it was a migrant or a vagrant, or whether it moved in on some plant, we really don't know. Just keep looking out for it, or if John Davis reproduces the photograph again, that'll be evidence that it actually is here. But it has been found in Washington, so it is on our list. Typically flies April through August, but this is the great news, that they're diurnal. They fly during the day and they nectar heavily. Wide variety of host plants, most often in our area, or at least in BC, where it is regularly found. Be snowberry and honeysuckle most often, but it's also been recorded on hawthorn and viburnum. And you're going to find this in a variety of habitats, but mostly you're going to find it in gardens, young woodlands, basically these open, lush, herbaceous areas. I mean, it's clear. You can see right through it. Typical, but still typical Sphinx-looking caterpillar, right? It's got the horn, pretty bulbous. This tribe, though, makes its pupa in leaf litter. It doesn't dig down. Instead, it'll just clump up a bunch of leaves and make a very loose cocoon that really offers no protection at all. There's not much behind that cocoon.
And that tail.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, these little pencil tufts of scales there. That's the scent. That's where the scent plume is going to come from. At night, the females, just like our silk moths and mini moths, will basically sit at a spot, except for these guys, because they're diurnal. But our nocturnal ones are going to sit on a branch, some exposed area. The females are going to emit a scent. They're going to extend a scent gland. In some moths, this is extremely complex, and in some, it's just a little bulb that just pops out of their abdomen. And then the wind takes their scent, and it's the male's job to find that. So notice how red this is, though. Notice how red the scales on the wings are compared to our next one. So this is the snowberry clearing, or called the bumblebee hawk moth, because it's imitating a bumblebee.
Is it about the size of a bumblebee?
It is. It is.
Huh.
And this is, and even though this is a hummingbird, it's still about 2.5 inches. So a small hummingbird, but still does confuse people. So this one's 2 broods, Flies June through August. It's throughout Montane, Washington, but we really don't have a good idea of where this is because so many people see this and pass it off as a bumblebee. And so it could be much more widespread than we think it is. The adults are nocturnal just like the other ones. They nectar. The host plants include, as the name might suggest, snowberry. Most often has also been found on honeysuckle and dogwood. So you notice though that this one's very much like a bumblebee. It's black and yellow. It doesn't have that red that the hummingbird clearwing would. This one I found in Yakima, Oak Creek Canyon. The clouds had come overhead. The butterflies had stopped flying. We decided to look for larvae. When I looked through here, and in the back of my mind I knew about this guy, but I had unearthed what I thought was a bumblebee. That looks like a bumblebee, doesn't it? So a little, it's like something doesn't look quite bumblebee-ish about it, and it was most definitely the bumblebee hawk moth. In much of the literature, you're gonna see it referred to as Hemeris definis, which was thought to be a coast-to-coast species. Recent work has shown that we have a western and eastern sister species group. So now our western species is called Hemeris thetis, and then the eastern is definis. So, Kim, do you want to recall our encounter with this species during our chumstick count?
So it was, our car was one of 3 teams that was heading up Chumstick, or up to the top of Chumstick. And we weren't having the best of butterfly days, but we were having a fabulous moth day. I probably shouldn't say that. We were having a fabulous moth day. And one of the best, well, no, I can't even say that, but I'd never seen this before. I didn't even know it existed until that day. And it was nectaring on this blue flower. It was a little penstemon that was just
Barely
like
6 inches.
high.
Oh, it wasn't even a penstemon. Barely 6 inches off the ground. The tiniest little pink flower you could possibly imagine.
You don't know what it was.
No, unfortunately.
It was just very exciting to see
But
it.
it was finding those with ease.
And it flew straight.
It flew very straight,
Yeah.
and the thing, basically, as we watched this, because I caught the first one, and it was funny because I had mentioned this to Kim and Melanie that day that there were Sphinx moths that flew during the day and mimicked bumblebees. And they said, no way. A mile later, I found one for me. So I caught it in the jar and then let it go. Well, we walked down a trail otherwise and we found another one. We were discussing how you might actually distinguish this from a bumblebee. And one thing we knew as we noticed as it was nectaring, have you noticed that when bumblebees land on a flower, they land, right? They kind of crawl around, they land, they probe it. These guys hover. So that's one way you're going to distinguish it. Like, that looks like a bumblebee, but it's hovering when it visits each flower. It doesn't actually land on it. So by flight, you could distinguish this from a bumblebee. Maybe the birds will figure that out too.
So this
Dave?
is
Was that near Chumstick Springs where you found them?
It was the stop up the road from Chumstick Springs. Do you remember where you and I met last year? We ran into each other on that road. This guy's been out so many times.
I think so.
Okay, but it was at that bend where the road just keeps going up Dirty Canyon, and then it's that first sharp switch back.
Yeah, sure. Mhm.
Yeah, that's where he found them.
Well, so it was way down, okay.
Yeah, the second one that we found, it could have been the one I originally released. It could have been an actual second individual, but
Up at Chumstick Springs, which is, just below the peak, there's sometimes lots of them up there. We've seen days when you might see 10 of them around.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty amazing.
so I mean these are probably more widespread than we think. Just have to give that bumblebee a second look. But they're really, really cool sphinx.
David,
Uh-huh.
so that photo there, the top left photo, the wings look very bluish. Is that just the way the light was that day?
That was the light, the angle of the camera versus the overhead light. No. Otherwise, they're very clear.
Gotcha.
Just very doesn't really know from color tone. Interestingly, though, when they come out of the pupa, they're not clear. All these have scales on them. So they are actually scaled. I couldn't find a picture of that, but on their first flight, those scales are so loosely attached they all blow off. Whereas all these scales are firmly attached. So if you do ever find a larva and rear it through and you get one of these, when you first see it, it'll have scales on it. But what the heck is that? You'll look through the guides and say, well, it's a bumblebee, but what's with all these scales? And then it will fly for its first time and it'll show you who it is.
The larva is a good example of why they call them Sphinx moths.
Because it supposedly kind of looks like the Egyptian Sphinx. That may take as much imagination as my bird head on the one-eyed Sphinx.
Is that the only larva that has a horn at the end? It's just the Sphinx?
The Sphinx moths?
Yes.
Well, you're going to have a lot of different caterpillars that will have some kind of appendage. As far as a really distinct horn like that, I can't say for sure, but this size of larva, absolutely. You're going to find other, like, say, silk moth caterpillars. Like, have you ever seen the hickory horn devil? Just all these different horns branching out all these different directions. But Sphinx moths are going to be very smooth, unornated larvae with just a single horn at the end. So I mean, they should be not only fairly distinctive adult moths, but they should be fairly distinctive larvae too. Okay. So only two in that subfamily, but a very unique and very cool subfamily, to say the least.
Also, it almost looks like someone posed those caterpillars.
Yes.
Well, these caterpillars are easy. I'll talk a little bit about raising these guys a little later, because some of them are fairly easy to raise and get eggs from the females. So when you're raising them, and you've taken hundreds of photos as the larva develops, you might get a few of those really cool shots. Oh yeah, I mean, in particular, that one's a very nice little shot. Okay, so we got 6 more confirmed regular species in Washington. I think that's another thing that draws me about the Sphinx moths, is that it's diverse enough that we have 19, which is able to take up a meeting like this, but it's a small enough group that you can wrap your head around it. It's not like those noctuids or geometrids or something like that. It's not like the pug moths where we have 120 species. Anyway, okay, so we're now getting into some really colorful ones and some really unique ones, just in their own right, not even as a group, but just individually as each species. So this is Clark's day sphinx. As you can guess by the name, it's a diurnal. It nectars, even though apparently the proboscis is not that well developed. It has been reported in flowers. But this is going to be an early, a spring species. This is going to be a spring species. Very scattered in Washington records. It's not common. But you're going to find it in dry, low elevation forests, usually like ponderosa pine forests. And the host plants are going to be primroses. So you have this very olive green with this black bordered orange hind wing. This is fresh. So I mean, this is a little bit more of a worn specimen, but I mean, that's fresh. That shows you how bright these guys can be. Very cool looking larvae as well, black and white with these very thickly rimmed sphericals.
I see no horn.
You see no horn. The next 3 species lack what you would call a horn, but they're still pretty big. So, I haven't seen this guy. And John Davis, our moth guy, has seen this once. So, that might tell you how rare they are. Not really much else to say. I think it just has to do with the fact that they live in places that we're not looking at the right time of year. This should be called the bumblebee sphinx. But it's called the yellow-banded day sphinx. Now this guy is rare. And likely because it flies at a time when we're not looking for it. Even though you might say, April, June, we're looking for it, but this lives in high elevation areas, usually open meadows where we would think, yeah, forest to look for butterflies, but these guys are often flying while there's still snow on the ground. So when we think of high meadows, high open meadows, we're thinking July, August. These guys are done. The adults do nectar. They are diurnal. Why would you be nocturnal if you look like a bumblebee? Or why would you look like a bumblebee without using that disguise? So same as the Clark Sphinx, scattered Washington records, but it's all high elevation, open patches in coniferous forests, rich in fireweed. This is the only confirmed host plant. There's some suspicions of thimbleberry, but that hasn't been confirmed.
Are all of these moths inclined to fly in cooler and cloudy weather as opposed to butterflies, which like
The
it's sunny
diurnals
and warm?
can.
So
Yes.
you'd think in April it's not going to be very warm at higher elevation.
April, May, June at high elevation still pretty cool for butterflies, so we're not up there. But for a very robust moth like this that can vibrate its wings and get those flight muscles going, that body can hold quite a bit of heat. So it can fly around. Now the best way that you're going to find this one, because it is rare, you're not going to find the adult all that often. Instead, look on fireweed for these big black caterpillars with no horn, but instead this eye, where the horn would be. That's going to be how we're going to find more records of this species, is by looking for the larva. Because the larva, while we're out there looking at butterflies, that's when the larvae are going to be out. They're going to overwinter as the pupa stage, so it's in July and August when we're going to find the larva. So this is one of them just trying desperately to fly in the cold weather. Matthew was saying that there was snow literally a couple meters away from this individual, so they fly when the butterflies are just not out. Okay, so I'm hearing more wows as we go through this. Okay, so the Pacific green sphinx is also called the bear sphinx. Maybe because it's fuzzy, but so are the others. I'm not sure. So this takes a special effort to find in the flight period.
Wow.
You've got to be out of your mind. So Eastern Washington flies in winter into early spring. The adults don't feed, and they are nocturnal. So we got to go out into Eastern Washington at night. We have to go out to Eastern Washington at night in the winter to find these. We have to set up a light trap. Now, light traps in June, July, August. If you're looking for a sphinx, well, you're going to get a ton of other stuff that's going to interest you. It's going to be like consolation prizes. Here, you may get nothing if you set up a light trap in February. Host plants are Monograceae, so primrose family.
Evening primrose.
Evening primrose.
It's a separate family from primrose.
Okay. I'm the sphinx moth guy, not the plant guy. That's why we have to use it. So they live in more oak chaparral habitat at lower elevations, open pine forests at modern elevations. And I regret that I have found this guy, not as an adult, as larva. And I brought it home, and I looked in the literature, and apparently in the literature it said that a lot of them just seem to lose the will to live at the pupation stage. They get to the pupation stage and they just die. So I had brought this larva home. The larva looked like this. Tan head, black, once again that eye, where the horn should be. And so I was sure that that's what it was, and I found one, and another student on the entomology trip that I was on found one, so we actually found a population of them. So this kind of speaks to trying to find the larva. I do intend on going back to that area in February, as crazy as that sounds, to try to find these adults, but I'll settle with the larva for now.
When did you find the larvae?
So this was in July last year, so in 2010, mid-July. I brought it home. No, I apologize, excuse me. It was late May.
You had a long time to over there.
Yeah, oh yeah, but it was already on the ground searching for a place to dig.
Yeah.
So I took this larva home, put it in a jar with some substrate for it to bury, and it kind of carved out a little shallow area to pupate in, and it just sat there for a week. And it started turning this weird yellow-green color, and I thought, great, it's one of those that lost the will to live. Come back home from work one day, and there's a fresh green pupa there. And I thought, yes, I made it. I still have the pupa. It was moving for about a year and hasn't emerged, and it's no longer moving, so it's probably dead. I forgot to bring the pupa, so I apologize. But it was about this big. Nice chestnut brown. Probably what my mistake was that I took a moth that is used to flying in January, March to Western Washington. So the pupa did not get the cold signal that it needed, that winter had passed. Because our winters in the Puget Sound are fairly mild. So we didn't get much freezing. So it was probably waiting for that time to come for a year, and it never did. So when it does pupate, it doesn't develop. It waits for that long period of cold before it does develop, as the moth inside the pupa. So what I should have done is probably threw it in my refrigerator for a couple months. But I left it outside, and we get 40 degrees plus, and just didn't give it the signal it needed. Is probably what happened. So here it is at what looks like phlox, but basically these long tube flowers. I mean, just a really gorgeous creature. Once again, another nice pink one. Really cool looking larva. With these orange, yellow, black circled spots, yellow horns. But there's quite a bit of diversity in the color of this. They can be nearly black, they can be brown, they can be this bright green color. There are a couple of near lookalikes. So this is the Gallium Sphinx. This is another very scattered, rarer species than, definitely rarer than Lineata, definitely rarer than the white line Sphinx. You're going to find this more in mountainous areas, mostly eastern Washington. There's a couple of records in mountainous areas of western Washington. May through August, the adults do nectar and they fly by day and night. And the best association we can get is wet boggy areas. Host plants include fireweed, bedstraw, and primroses. And Gallium is the genus for bedstraw, yes?
Yes,
Okay.
that's true.
Okay,
And
so
when you said primroses, can I ask, is that evening primroses or?
it's the Onygraceae. So
Evening
so
primrose.
the evening primrose.
So you'll learn that now.
Will do. So Gallium Sphinx, another sphinx named after its host. So you notice this black spot here, and you'll notice this kind of tan, gold, orange, yellow, whatever color you want to call it, band. And it doesn't encircle this spot like it will our next species. So this is our next species, the spurge hawk moth. This is a new Washington record as of this year. I got a photo sent in from John Bauman in Spokane. You notice that the tan here, the tan band is much wider and completely encloses this spot. This was intentionally introduced into parts of the Intermountain West to control leafy spurge, which is an aggressive non-native. And places where there's a nice account here that the next year they estimated over 1 million larvae in the fields that they had introduced it in. So it can be extremely abundant. And leafy spurge is a toxic plant, much like the milkweed that our monarch uses, so you would expect that maybe it's a brightly colored caterpillar.
Oh, goodness.
You notice the double row of spots there versus our Gallium Sphinx, which has the single spot. But yeah, it can be black, bright red, yellow, but basically these very bright colors saying, you can eat me, but you're going to regret it. These guys will also, when disturbed, start vomiting quite violently. Okay, so we're going to move through these really quickly. These are species that either skim really close to Washington or have been found here in the past. But just really quickly. And so our first one we're going to look at is another non-native that was introduced. Whether intentionally or not, we don't know. So this is the elephant hawk moth. Don't ask me how it got that name. It was introduced into Vancouver, BC, area called Pitt Meadows. They took 24 adults at lights in one night. Larva is supposed to be imitating a snake, but oh, there's nothing like that. Pink, 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 pink.
How big is that?
About 3-4 inches. Don?
Introduced accidentally, or?
We don't know. We don't. Well, I mean, it wasn't a. We know it wasn't an official introduction, but it uses fireweed, so there's really no reason to suspect that it won't spread. It has been spreading in the Vancouver area, so we'll see how fast it does. But I mean, I'm in Bellingham, so kind of secretly hoping to get one of these.
How long ago was this?
I'd rather it not be there, but what's that?
How long ago was it released?
Estimating 1995 that it was. That's when it was first found.
And it's native to where?
Native to Europe. Yeah. So we don't know. I mean, it could have been accidentally introduced, or maybe someone said, "Wow, that's beautiful. I wish I had it in my hometown," and maybe introduced it that way. But there was no official release. So, all right. So it's the Sequoia Sphinx. Currently north to northern Oregon, juniper host plants. Caterpillar greatly blends in with the juniper. This is small. This is about maybe 2 inches. So it's small for a sphinx, but it's still a sphinx, and it's just uniformly gray with a few little black lines and just this uniform brown hindwing. So definitely be on the lookout for this in southeastern Washington, where we do have quite a bit of juniper. I suspect that it's just been overlooked. Thinking about traveling to the Juniper Dunes Wilderness and taking a light trap out there.
That larva is on incense cedar, Calicedrus occurrens.
Further south it is found on incense cedar, but up here it's been found on western red cedar and juniper. But for some reason it doesn't do well on our wet west coast forests. Twin spotted sphinx. This one skirts northeastern Washington, much like the Aphrodite fritillary, where it's kind of just there, and you think it's got to be there, we're just not seeing it. Willow host plants, much like our one-eyed sphinx, you'll see this very much like it, but a couple ways to tell it apart. This spot is bisected, so it's not a nice pupil, it's bisected into 2 spots. This is called the twin-spotted sphinx. You also notice this, this crescent moon here, which this does not have. And then there's usually this dark patch which kind of creates a brown dash, which is lacking in the one-eyed sphinx. This would be something for our friends in the Northeast that we made this year to look out for. And then the yellow sphinx, I got an email from Bob Pyle asking if this was one of them, and there was an acquaintance at Pyle's. They did find a larva on a potted euphorb plant and reared it through, and it ended up being this yellow sphinx. Now we have to ask, did it come in on the plant, or did it actually come here regular? Did it come here by itself? Because it has strayed north all the way north to New England. Very few records west of the Rockies this far north, but conceivably it could have. So we really don't know about that. So this is one that does stray north. Okay, so that's all for the sphinxes. We've got a few to look out for. We've got 19 known resident sphinxes in Washington. A few of my references. This book came out in 2007. Wonderful book. Will cost you. The hawk moths in North America. We've got our nice white line sphinx moth on it. It's about $90 right now, but it covers all 127 sphinxes of North America. And then Bill O'Leaky's Sphingidae of the United States. If you just search Sphingidae of the United States, you'll find it on Google. And he has tons of photos of larvae, adults, submitted by tons of contributors. Bugguide.net is a great image resource, and then of course butterfliesandmoths.org is a way that you can not only see where they've been found, but also submit your findings as you find them. Because I'm teaching you this so that I have more eyes out there looking for these guys. And if you want, you can come up here and take a look at the few that I have up here. How long did I take you over? This is the wild cherry sphinx. You see how how extensive that white is. We prefer, yep, white line Sphinx, and this is our Moths.
Species name was?
Modesta.
So they just kind of.
Do you like spreading these guys because they're so robust? You really don't have to worry
Oh,
about hurting them.
yeah,
They are so
okay.
tough, even in death. That
Oh,
if
they-
that
you
wing
can-
snap back a couple times, you don't have to worry. They're not going to hurt.